Linda, am I doing it? Hi, and welcome to the Braving Business Podcast. Today, we have the wonderful Miss Kristin Fitch on. She's a podcaster, an online business and technology strategic consultant, and an entrepreneur. She is the podcast host and producer of several podcasts, including Building a Life That You Love, which is a top 10% podcast, and Faith Fueled Women, also a top 10% podcast. She speaks regularly. She writes, podcasts, and advises on technology, building an online business, leadership, self-development, creativity, and faith. Kristin, it's an honor to have you on with Tal and I on the Braving Business Podcast.
I am so excited to be here, and I love that the topics that you guys are covering in the show, and I think it's so needed because what entrepreneurs really need is they need to be encouraged in the times when it's hardest and the times when we're struggling the most. So I love it.
Well, and you know what? And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you're noticing probably that PJ is now wearing his hat. And these must be hard time. I know PJ's recently started a new business, and can you not afford a haircut? Is that what's going on?
Wow. My gosh. All right. So I guess it's pile on PJ day.
No, not at all. I mean, just noticing. I'm just noticing.
You know what? I wanted to look nice for Kristin. She's a wonderfully accomplished woman. And so I wanted to make sure that I, kind of showed, I'm not going to change out of t-shirts, but I'm going to show at least that, I showered. That's always good.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Did you blow dry your hair? Because it looks a little blow dry. No?
Anyway, Tal, nice glasses.
Yeah, you noticed. Wow. I'm impressed.
I stare at your face all day, so I should notice.
Yes. I'm experimenting. A former guest said something that I should date eyewear, and I'd never thought about dating eyewear. It's hard enough to date humans, but I gotta say I'm kind of liking switching it up a little bit. So I'm going a little wider with these frames. In future episodes, I'll be wearing wireless. So I'll be surprising you with my eyewear. You'll never know what you're going to get, PJ. It's like a box of chocolates.
It's going to be like costume changes. It's going to be like an Elton John concert, like just wild stuff.
Absolutely. Speaking of concerts, tomorrow night, and this episode is going to be broadcast in September, but tomorrow night I'm in Tampa Bay, and we're in mid-August, and Beyonce is performing in Tampa Bay, and I'm going to see Beyonce. I'm so excited.
That's awesome.
I hear she puts on a hell of a show.
She does. I actually just saw Pink at Wrigley Field here in Chicago this past week.
Awesome. How was she?
Oh, yeah. Fantastic.
How long is her show? I hear Beyonce show's 3 hours long.
Pink easily could have been 3 hours. She played, I want to say she played 2 hours and a little bit, because we have hard stops in Chicago. So she couldn't eke out for too long, but it was amazing. She was flying everywhere. It was great.
That's awesome. Well, I can't wait to see Beyonce. I'll report back after I do. Anyway, Kristin, thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy that you chose to be with us today. And your story is amazing. What you've accomplished is amazing. And as we discussed before the podcast, we are not here necessarily to celebrate accomplishments. Not that there's anything wrong with accomplishments. We all wish to have them. We are here to actually discuss setbacks. We're here to discuss the humanity of being in business. And why don't we start from the very top? Talk to me about what got you interested in business.
Sure. So let's see. So it was probably late 90s, which I know that ages me a little bit, but that I started working for a media company. And so
you are talking to two men that are either 50 or above. So You're not aging yourself. I thought you were talking about just yesterday afternoon.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think we're all similar age, in similar age range. But anyway, so I worked in media for some time, and actually my mom was a artist, children's book author, and illustrator. And we used to go, so on the side, so it was kind of a side hustle for me. I did licensing, I was a licensing agent for people that had artwork that they wanted to put on product. And so I would go and represent my mom and a couple other artists at shows at the Javits Center in New York City. And from doing that, we had some successes. We got some product in Target and Walmart and, other places, dollar store. but it's kind of, you were beholden to them picking your design. And a lot of people wanted to buy designs outright. So the point is we eventually realized, gosh, all her characters, all her art could be applied online and we could make it our own business. And so, spin that out a bit into 2008, I had left my job in media and we started a company. I co-founded the company with my mom in 2008 called Ziggity Zoom, which ended up becoming
what an awesome
educational
name.
Yeah.
That's an awesome
educational technology company. And so basically it was in the early education space. We ended up providing workbooks and ebooks, and we did 7 game apps and things like that. But anyway, so the way that I became an entrepreneur was by working with my mom and seeing that we had the opportunity to pair my background in tech and online marketing with her expertise in being an artist and being able to kind of create content based on that early education family space.
How was that? How was the early goings of working with mom?
Luckily, I have the opposite of most people's moms, meaning she let me kind of run the show. She would do whatever I said. And literally, like, I could be like, Mom, you need to like knock out a workbook tomorrow. She would do it. You know what I mean? So there was never I was kind of in charge, right? I was considered the CEO, if you will. And she's a good workhorse, and actually my mom's about to turn 80 and she's probably the most technology able 80-year-old I know. And she's very fit, but anyway, she's mostly into her artwork at this point. But yeah, so it was actually really great to work with her, and our creativity when we worked together, when we were in town together was, it was electrifying. We were just on it. It was pretty awesome.
That's awesome. I can only picture my mom. She's no longer with us, but had she been around and had I started a company with her, I am sure half of this would be about business and the other half would be about, did I do my laundry? Is my house clean enough? Right? Like it would be those kind of things. So,
and I so get that because I have 3 sons, 2 that are in college or college age. And let me tell you, it's a lot of, oh my gosh, your room is so messy and all those things. So I can kind of get that.
Yeah, I'm fortunate. I only have my youngest, who's 20 and going into his junior year at Tufts, and he's the only one that's still home, and he is terribly messy. Fortunately for me, he's only here a few weeks in the summer. He spends some weeks with my ex-wife in Long Island, and the time that he's here, while I enjoy having him, I love having him, it really stresses me out to come into that room. It's amazing how much stuff he can pile up. I'm talking about bottles of water by the bed. I'm talking about bags of carry out food or more often ordered in food. And he's sitting in his room and it doesn't seem to bother him whatsoever. I don't understand that. I don't understand how people can do that. Not judging, just saying.
I can just say, not that we're talking about parenting so much on this show, but having 3 sons at home, so one's in high school, 2 in college, I have walked in their bathroom before and literally thought, how can anyone live this way? It is so disgusting. I mean, like toilet paper rolls on the ground, empty. And you're thinking, but you knew at 6 how to like clean your bathroom properly, but somehow that's gone out the window.
It's pretty shocking. It does get better. I mean, for most people, it gets better. Not everyone. Let's talk about, Ziggity Zoom is a business that you focus a lot of time and attention on. What prompted you to keep pushing, keep going forward, trying to pursue other and bolder initiatives?
Yeah, and so a couple things with that. First of all, so Ziggity Zoom, like I said, we started in 2008 and we were a bare bones, just 2 of us, ran the company. And yes, I had help on occasion, like we had a designer for a short period of time that we paid full time, but mostly we would just, it was contract work or it was rev share agreements, so that's a lot of ways. I was always very creative and agile on figuring out how to work with people for not a lot of money. And that doesn't mean to undermine their work. What my point is we didn't have a huge budget at that point. And so I had to get, creative. Anyways, so when we started the company, first it started out with a lot of content creation. But over time we realized, obviously we added advertising there at some point, but then down the road, we were able to get a deal with Barnes and Noble when their Nook was actually a thing. It's not really a thing so much, and it was never really done well, but we had 35 ebooks with them on their Nook platform. And so for some period of time, that was actually bringing in some decent revenue. And then we spun out into doing these, the iPhone game apps. And 6 were for children and 1 was an adult game app. It was kind of like Words with Friends in the sense of it was in that same space. And so with each one of these things, we had some success. For instance, our Ziggity Zoom over time reached, I think, cumulatively over 10 million users. I don't remember the page views, maybe it was 500 million or something. So while that's small for a lot of people, right? Because mine wasn't monthly, it was cumulative. We had a lot of milestones we hit that looked really good, but our revenue milestones never really hit what they should have. And to be honest, one of the reasons for that is we both had too many hats to wear, and I could never find the right partner to bring on that could really help us with growth in the online space, the early education space, to grow our revenues. And so we really struggled, to be honest with you.
And speaking of size, because you talked, you talked to us before this interview about how sometimes entrepreneurs make their lives more difficult by pretending to be bigger than they actually are. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So in 2008, when we started, sure, blogging was a big thing. And part of our site was somewhat like blogging, but it was more providing content and resources for people than it was about like our personal story. And so because of that, we felt like we were competing with people like Family Fun or, some of the smaller Disney properties or sites they bought. And so we thought, oh, we need to seem bigger than we are. But, what I learned later on is really people they align more with that, you being your authentic self, and us having celebrated that we were a 2 women-owned mother-daughter team, and we were really small. And so we weren't using that to our advantage. And so really, if we're honest about our size, if we're honest about where we're at, how we're doing and what we need, people can come in that you start to know that what might mentor you or the groups you're in and help you where you need help. But if you're not telling people, you know what, we're really struggling with this revenue piece over here or this growth piece, how can anybody know, right, that the circles I was in, that I needed help in that area? And so what I learned is being really transparent and really sharing with a small group of people where you're at and what your struggles are. So whether that's in a mastermind or a small group of other, CEOs or entrepreneurs, you need a safe space where you can deal with some of those challenges safely.
And how would you go about asking for help in those situations?
Do you mean like what I dealt with, or do you mean if you're in a small group?
Either one. Like I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Well, yeah. So I think, okay, so for instance, if you were in a small group with other like-minded people that were also building their businesses, a lot of people I know that have done those, and I've done some myself, often either monthly or quarterly, you get an opportunity to kind of say, like, what's kind of your struggle? What do you need help with? So I think you need to have open dialogue to talk about maybe what's your biggest struggle or hurdle right now and what's your goal, and then getting feedback from that group of people on how, strategies or who you might connect with to help you with those things.
And did you struggle with that? I mean, when you were a young entrepreneur, was that a difficult thing to do? And why do you think?
Yeah, actually, I don't think it was from a lack of me being willing to share that stuff. I think a couple things. I have no problem, and I've often been in a room where it's all guys and me. I have 3 older brothers, younger sister. I have all sons. Like, I'm very comfortable being around men. But I will tell you, I've been in the room so many times. I remember going to this event right around when I'd started my business. It was all men. I mean, it was like 40 men and me. For like 5 months, I was the only lady showing up. And then eventually some women showed up. But, first of all, I think you're already I tried to fit in instead of realizing that my uniqueness was what was actually the special sauce, right? So in other words, I think I always was thinking, oh, I need to be more like all the guys in the room that have these tech companies or this thing or this successful business. So I was trying to maybe emulate being more like that instead of realizing all the unique qualities and all my own skill set I brought to the table. And so I think I either would be a little quieter, or I would try to like, oh, well, these are things I've done that are similar to what they've done. Do you know what I mean? And so I don't think it was so much because I didn't want to share it, as either there wasn't the opportunity at that time, like it wasn't all people at my same level, and I felt like a lot of people that I was connecting with, so I had a network. None of them had built an online business in my area that I personally knew that had scaled it and made it really big. I knew people, on the West Coast, DC, New York, all these other places, but I didn't live in those places. And so my network at that time, right, 2008, was much smaller in those spaces.
Interesting. And I think about a conversation we had with another guest, and the topic was authenticity and being honest.
Yeah.
Did you find in your earlier days, just kind of getting your footing as an entrepreneur, did you find transparency and vulnerability to be very difficult? A lot of entrepreneurs struggle with that. Or was it something that came naturally to you? Some people are fortunate like that.
I think it just depends on what I was doing at the time. So when we started Ziggity Zoom, I guess it was more, head down every day. I wasn't even thinking about words like that, whereas now I feel like those are words I hear weekly, on podcasts, and I talk about those things on my, my podcast. So I think as there was more information about these kind of things, people talked about these things more, it's a lot easier to be more authentic and vulnerable, because we realize that that's how people connect. Humans connect with each other when they can relate to the person, relate to the story, relate to the struggle or the wins. And when you don't share those things and it's all just like, yay, look what I did, it's not relatable in the same way. And so, yeah, I definitely, when I was first starting out, I don't think I knew that, right? I wasn't educated that that was actually a good thing to do.
Interesting. So in the beginning, so it's you and your mom, and you guys are clearly doing well. I mean, I'm not in the app space, so I don't know what the numbers mean, but if someone told me, yeah, I got 500 million views or whatever else, I'm like, well, that's pretty darn good. I mean, that's pretty amazing. How, and you didn't know people that were in your space locally that you knew that had scaled. So how did you overcome that? How did you focus on that to ensure that you were able to get to the next levels that you wanted to attain?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I mean, one of the challenges is we never solved the growing the growing numbers wasn't the issue. Our revenue numbers really never reached where they could have and should have. I mean, there's no question about it. And so eventually, honestly, I burned out from trying to run a company and build it into something more successful than it was. And I just started feeling pulled towards other interests I had. But I know part of that is because if you're not hitting metrics like revenue, which is kind of important as being a business, guess what? At some point, I'm going to be like, is this worth my time? Is it go? Because if I'm going to pay us and then build a company, right? The numbers weren't working at some point, and some of our revenue streams started to die, not from things we were doing. Like the book, Barnes & Noble's Nook wasn't that great, right? And so over time, it kind of floundered, and we had some of those on Amazon's place, but they have billions of books, practically, right? And so it's really hard to show up there and make sales for ebooks. They were ebooks at the time. But anyway, so I think the point was a lot of things happened, but one of my learnings, right? Because I don't think they're failures. I think even if I didn't spin that business off to the size it should have been, every lesson I took from that now makes me a better entrepreneur or consultant in the future, because I've already lived through those pains and I've learned from those the things that I had to walk through, as hard as they might have been. And so we still own the company, but I'm not working in a full-time capacity.
So Kristin, I don't want to move past what actually happened in those moments where you were contemplating moving on and doing other things, and you were living with the reality that you weren't getting the results you wanted. So I think it's great. And I think, for all our listeners and viewers, you should absolutely take away that this is the very point of of braving business. If you persevere and you're brave and you carry on, which doesn't mean, by the way, sometimes not moving on from something. Sometimes you have to. But if you are brave and you do persevere, on the other side of that is oftentimes a lot of satisfaction, lessons learned, and success. But in the moment, it feels like shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that. Talk to us about that.
Well, I can tell you, how much more crappy it feels when your mom's in business with you and she's potentially trying to have that as income that she lives off of. So if you say, I'm stepping away because I need to do what's best for me, and we're not getting to where we need to go. That's not a fun feeling, is it? Like, so while my mom, of course, didn't hold that against me, there was no issues. It's still to this day, bothers me to some level. There's no question about it. And I know that even now, like, we still sell workbooks, we still, get traffic, even though I'm barely, touching that stuff. It's still the potential to actually not be what it was, because it's a different time, but it's still there, kind of like sitting there, and it does haunt me, right? It calls me back to kind of work on it, but I'm building other things, so I don't have the resources or time.
What conversations did you have with yourself at the time? Were you angry with yourself? Were you disappointed? Did you feel responsible?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure I felt partly responsible, right? Like, I should be able to figure this out. It did in that time feel like failure. It felt like failure because I saw all the good metrics. I saw all the amazing content we created. I saw the people that we provided content to, so many amazing things. Like, our email list was 50,000 people. I mean, we did everything organically, but we never spent $1 on advertising, nothing. It was all just, I mean, I understood SEO. I understood a lot of things at that time. So it was all just implementation, right? But it took a lot of time. And so I knew, though, I had 3 sons about to go to college. And while, yes, we had money and whatever, it was like, I couldn't justify not paying myself more or down the road for the hope that it was going to become this way bigger, huge payoff down the road. Like, I felt like I'd put in enough time, and I kind of had to move on, at least for a period of time, right? I had to take a break away from it because I was kind of exhausted, and I was getting cross-eyed, right? Like feeling like you're hitting your head against the wall, and you're like, this is not resolving, So I needed to step away and take a consulting gig that, paid me well and let me do something different for a time.
I can relate.
Yeah. And I'd like to ask both of you this question then. We're all entrepreneurs. I don't know if there's an entrepreneur out there that doesn't have failure. Because if you're an entrepreneur and you never had failure, well, either you're incredibly lucky, or actually that's it. You're just incredibly lucky. So, I back in middle aughts, 2005, I had my own company. It was a custom made blue jean company. It did extremely well. And I was so incredibly vested in it, just emotionally and physically and monetarily,
financially,
right? Yeah, the whole thing, right? And it was my brass ring, right? I had a handle on that, and there was nothing stopping me. Like, just like Kristin said, all the guerrilla marketing, all the grassroots efforts to get it going, it did unbelievably well. And then, because of forces way outside of my purview, all of a sudden it just failed, right? Like, I was making them in Mexico, and the largest textile manufacturer in the world, in Latin America. And because of trade regulations, all of a sudden, all the brands that were manufacturing in that factory went to China. And so my factory lost 1/3 of their workforce overnight. And then all of a sudden, everything that was going well the next day was terrible. And so it was a hard fall for me mentally, because I was so tied into it, and because I was so wrapped into it. And I even went to therapy about it, because, and my therapist was like, oh my gosh, I've heard of you. I've heard of the company. You should be proud of yourself that you did this. I'm like, yeah, but I failed, right? Like, I failed. It's no longer around. And I took a lot of that on myself, and it took me a long time to work through that, to understand that failure is really a lesson that you can learn from. It's a friggin' hard lesson, though. But how did, how, I know you work past it. I know you're able to go, hey, I'm going to get this consulting gig, which is awesome. And now you can actually have food on the table, which is great. And all that. But what steps did you take to get you past that? For me, it was just like rock bottom. Like, what steps did you take to get past that?
Yeah. So I think one is I'm typically an optimist, or I say a realistic optimist, right? I'm not over the top far that way. But so one, it's that I'm going to try to see the upside, right? What can I garner from this moment? What can I garner from me doing this? Can I come back later? But then also it's, for me, faith's important. And I get it. Not all the listeners, this may be, but for me, it was really interesting. What happened is I told my mom literally on a phone call, hey, if we don't by the end of the year get the revenue to a better place, I'm going to be looking for something else. And I was thinking more, not a full-time, consulting thing. I was just making a statement to her, but I said it out loud. The next day I had an old colleague reach out to me about an opportunity out of the blue, right, for a full-time consulting gig. And I was like, that feels a little bit like divine timing. Like I literally admitted it. I shared it. I didn't just have the thought in the back of my head, or like, I might need to, I said it. And it was, so for me, I kind of followed those breadcrumbs, right. And had the conversation with my old, friend and colleague, and then with, other colleagues of his, and it worked out. So for me, I kind of I have faith that where I'm being led, how the things I do, the things I try, all of them are lining up for that next thing. The things I learned, for instance, in that consulting gig, one of the many things I did, because I was doing marketing, I was a marketing technology director. I actually was running their podcast. And oh, by the way, I bought my podcast 5 years before I started my podcast. It took me that long to get back to starting it. So the point though is for me, it's that I believe everything is going to work for my favor, or for my benefit in the long run, even if that means I had to stop something, or I feel like I failed at something. I know that there's always an upside, and I always know that I've learned things from it, and I try to be aware of those things.
So you did in fact pivot, and you started to a very successful podcast, Building a Life You Love and Faith Fueled Women. Tell us about that. Tell us about the decision to get into podcasting. Did you view it as a business, or did you view it as a hobby?
Yeah. So like I said, I bought the microphone 5 years prior to starting my show, which I started the first one in mid 2021. And so I knew I wanted to get into that space, and I think it was because while I haven't been doing a ton of writing regularly at the moment, I have done some writing. And of course I was doing online blogging or reviews and things, but I kept feeling this pull to really encourage people and help people see that they can step off the path of expectation and move into the path, the life they want, right? And that they can have purpose and impact in both in their homes and their lives. And so that's really one of my goals. And so I started the show because I love talking to people. I love having conversations. I love just getting to share those conversations and the learnings with people, right? And the podcasting it's a very intimate way to do that. And in case you didn't know, it's very hard to keep people watching a YouTube video for over 3 minutes or something like that. But on podcasts, most people are listening to, 30 to 1 hour long podcasts. It's because they're doing it passively, right? They're in their car, or they're cooking dinner, they're on a walk. YouTube, you have to be focusing on your computer or on your phone. And I'm not talking about video game YouTube. My sons do that all day long, but I'm talking about this sort of.
Another mystery of youth.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so I started the first one, and I loved the concept of it. But to be honest with you, for the first year or longer, I have bounced around, meaning that, yes, it's my podcast, Building Life You Love, is under the business entrepreneurship area. But I have also just slightly tested with it under self-improvement or some other areas. And that is still, I guess we'd call it more of a hobby. I've made some money off of it, but it's pretty small potatoes so far. But the main reason is I've tested out what are the topics, even though it's always been the same theme. Last year, I even had changed it for some period of time, maybe 3 months, to business and breakthroughs. But here's the thing, I could talk about almost any topic, literally. Like, I'm very much a generalist. I have a tech podcast I've tested, right? Like, I have all these other ones. But the thing is if it's the deepest down in my soul, what conversations do I want to have? And while I love talking about business, and most of my shows are people that have started businesses, it's about so much more. Okay. And so that's really why I've not just said, this is what I promote and sell on my podcast, or I've, done these things. It's because I was trying to figure it out. I was allowing myself that space, which not everybody has that kind of runway, believe me, where you have to make as much money as possible quickly. But I gave myself space so that I knew it was going to be something I loved for a long time to come. And the second one, just real quick, Faith-Fueled Woman, happened because I truly felt like God was prompting me to be more open about my faith, because most of my life, it's kind of been like this separate compartment. Even on my business podcast, when it started, that wasn't a topic I mostly talked about. Whereas now that's woven in a little bit more with some of my guests. And so really, and actually my Building a Life You Love is actually now a top 5% podcast, but my numbers are better for my Faith-Fueled Woman. And that is building faster than my other podcast.
Wow. Good for you.
Congratulations. It's amazing.
But it's still a work in progress, right? And actually this fall is going to be a big push for me to try to monetize it more, because I haven't focused on that, which I now advise people, and we can talk about that, but how I would do it differently.
That's amazing. I know that, one of the interesting things in general, I think that is not appreciated is that it's not only hard to be an entrepreneur, it's hard to be a woman entrepreneur. Did you feel that, being a woman entrepreneur, whether it was in podcasting or beforehand, did you feel any added burden? Did you feel like you were judged more harshly or faced any different challenges than male entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so while I don't really think about those things a lot, because I'm sort of just like you have what you want to do, right? Go take care of it. But I will say, yes, and it's not two things. One, there's less representation of women building businesses, especially ones that really scale, which obviously I still haven't done that fully to the fullest level. But two, there's not even a lot of people, there's more women podcasting now, but like of successful shows, it's still such a small representation, right, of women that are running shows. And I follow a lot of women that have shows, but it's still, the numbers are still there. They're a lot lower. So one, there's less examples, although today versus 15 years ago, there's a lot more examples of women coming on and having these conversations. But I will share this story with you. When I first had my first two kids, I was working for that media company. And I remember I was one of the first people. So think about it. This was close to 20 years ago. I was able to get my media company. I had put together a proposal to get people to be able to work remote back then, 2 days a week, like my web designers, my developers. And so I worked from home on Fridays. And after work, if I had like that side business, if I had a call or something, or even a work call, my kids would be at daycare during the day, and then they would be home, late afternoon. If I had a call, they'd be in the other room. I guess my husband must have been home by then, or someone was over. So I was, doors closed in an office, but I was horrified if my kid would come to the door. I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to think like I'm not serious about business, because look, she's a mommy. And in the local newspaper wrote an article when we first started Ziggity Zoom about us. And do you know what they called it? They called it Mommy Webmaster. They wouldn't have said Daddy Webmaster. So yes, it's always different, and you're always regarded differently, or you're not regarded to the same level until you make it to a certain level, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think one thing that has changed, and there's been many things that COVID made so much harder, but it's more acceptable now to be human and have a family life. Having my dog is with me all the time. He's my constant companion, and people watch him. When I don't have a background, they watch him walking behind me, and it's fun. And even having your kids run around can be fun. And to those of you that are starting businesses, whether you're mommies or daddies that have your kids, particularly little ones, running around, don't feel that the people are going to judge you for that. I think if anything, it's endearing, and it makes people realize, this person is doing it for something. So just a word for those of you that may be struggling with the fact that you have little ones running around as you're trying to start your businesses.
Remember the beginning of, was it the beginning of COVID? It was either right at the beginning of COVID or possibly right before that. There was that video of a gentleman with a suit on talking on a Zoom, and his daughter came in, you know, as a little,
I love that.
little
It was on
toddler.
TV, I think.
Yeah, it was that was amazing, because we're all human, and we all have lives, and we have things to go and do. And I've been lucky enough to, even though I'm not as much of a trailblazer as you, Kristin, I have been lucky enough to be kind of working remote for the last probably 6 years now, 6 or 7 years, and just the change of lifestyle and the sense of inner peace that I have is so much better. So for me, my entire company, all my employees are remote, and it's just so much better, I think.
Absolutely. Well, and I do want to just add, Tal, absolutely, because that was the whole point, is that so many years ago, that's how I felt, that I would be judged. I absolutely agree that one of the benefits, not that there's a lot from COVID, was that everybody is dealing with these things, right? Our kids, if you have kids, all of our kids were home for some period of time trying to be educated, or you're, having to feed them and take breaks. So I love it. I 100% think it's one of the most amazing things that happened. And actually, I can top that's the news story that showed that guy with his kid. I was doing a podcast interview with one of my guests, and her kids were in the other room. I guess someone was watching them. And one of her young children, must have been 2 or something, little, in a diaper, comes in just in a diaper, toddling around, climbs on the counter desk, something behind her, and strips the diaper off in the video.
Oh my
now,
gosh.
that video has never gone live yet, but if I ever put these all up,
that would be
to me, she was horrified. And I was like, oh my God, that was like the best part of my whole day. Like I absolutely loved it. And it was amazing. Like I thought it was just so fun.
So Kristin, now you're working on building a podcasting network. You're also expanding into books. Talk to us about it. What does a podcasting network look like? What is it that you're trying to build? And why are you doing it?
Yeah. And so for now, right, because it's just me doing way too much still. And yes, I've learned that lesson. So hopefully by the end of the year, I'll have some help with my podcasting efforts so that I can do some of these bigger things. But really, my goal with the podcasting network is 2 things. I think people are overall, not everyone, is very disconnected from both themselves, that could be emotions, whatever, from others, from God, and from nature. And the second thing, right, look at the level of loneliness right now, the level of anxiety and depression. We're dealing with some of that in my own house, right, in the last year as well. So that, for one, I want to create content that's both inspiring, it's encouraging, it's useful, and it's uplifting, because I think there's too much dark content in the world currently. And I think it's hurting us, right? I think it's hurting us as a culture. There's a lot of divisiveness in the world. So I want to bring, not that other people aren't doing this, but I want to bring a light. I want to bring a light to remind people that you matter, that you have purpose, that you have value and worth right now, today. And I want to share those stories, and I want to, uplift people. And so I want to create a network. For instance, a couple of the topics, of course, some of them I've tested, some of them I haven't, but these are both books and podcast concepts I've already fleshed out and kind of tested or mocked up, I should say. One is called One Kind Word. One is Inspiration Mentors. It goes on and on, but I have a whole list. And these are things that have been in my mind or written out, like outlines, for several years. So they're not necessarily new things. And eventually it might become a network of lots more people. But originally I would just release, 5 to 8 shows that, I might have co-hosts. There's lots of different things, but it would really just to be what I said, that mission of trying to, provide inspirational, encouraging, and educational content to people, especially women, so that we can improve our lives and we can literally show up the way we're meant to show up and serve in our purpose and sort of passions.
I think that's amazing.
Thanks. We'll see what I pull off, right?
Well, anything that we can do, because we are a stalwart in the business podcast world. Anything we can do to help.
Yeah. Hey,
well,
I'm
we
open
aspire
to
to
any
be.
person that can
Yeah.
help.
Well, we should talk, but that's going to be boring to our audience. Let's get a little light. You have talked about the fact that when you were younger, you were a lifeguard, and that there were a lot of lessons of lifeguarding that you actually think apply to business. Can you tell us some of those lessons?
Yeah. Well, I get it. People think of lifeguarding and they think of Baywatch, right? And the red bathing suits and the buoys. And actually that was true. Our area did wear red bathing suits. But beyond that, right? I don't live in an area where you have full-time lifeguards. It's just in the summer. And a lot of the people that are lifeguarding are, 16 to 25. And so I was 16, 17 when I did this, which is a big responsibility, right? To guard the beach, right? There's a lot of variables in that. And so the things that I noticed, even at 16 and 17, that really are similar to businesses, as a lifeguard, you have to scan the waters, right? You have to scan the beach, scan the waters. You have to know what's going on around you. You have to understand it, right? And it's much like your business. You have to know what's going on in your business, but you also need to know what's coming. What else is out there? What's the trends that are about to come, kind of like AI now. And then the third thing is you have to know what are the threats that are coming. Is there a storm off in the distance? Is there a little kid that's wandering in his diaper into the beach and you notice it before he gets too deep? And so that's the first thing, right? Is you have to scan the waters. The second thing is in lifeguarding, just like in business, we often have to be agile. We have to act quickly and take action. Well, that's the same in our businesses. If we wait too long, there's literally hundreds of stories of businesses that they didn't pivot, they weren't agile, and now there is no business, right? It's kind of like, I don't know if it's Kodak, but it's one of the photography
Kodak,
companies.
Blockbuster,
Yes.
you name them. Right?
Yeah. So there's so many examples of that. So we have to be agile and we have to
BlackBerry.
Yeah. And then clear and constant communication. Like if you don't communicate with your channels, both the public, right, being a lifeguard up above them and see what's going on, and communicate with your the other guards, you may have a real serious emergency or a drowning. And that's the same in business. If you can't communicate properly with your customers, your clients, and then with your team, you're going to be in real trouble. And then the fourth thing was just how you interact with people. Are you kind? Are you giving? All these things matter because that's what they're going to remember, right? What if I was just I had a bad day and I was just nasty to someone that came up who had lost their child, which happened a lot. What do you think they're going to remember from their trip to Virginia Beach? That they were panicked and they were so scared that their child had gotten lost or taken and that I was mean to them, right? Like they're going to remember that. But if I'm kind and you're helping them and you calm them down and you help reunite them with their child, I mean, now you're so happy about the experience because everything worked out and the person was generous and kind, and so that's what we have to do in business as well.
I'm glad you're talking about that. And it's something that, we're going to persistently, our listeners are going to hear us talk again and again about kindness and about love. And, love isn't necessarily always associated with business, but I actually believe that it's a essential component. First, you need to love what you do. Second, you need to love the people that you're doing it with, and your customers. And you need to treat people with love. And that is, something that I think separates successful, happy, well-adjusted people and business from also runs and people that are struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great book by Adam Grant. I don't know if you've read his books.
Huge fan. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of them's called Give and Take, but it's not necessarily it's not about love, but it's about, do the givers, right, the kind people, the ones that are generous, do they come out on top or do the takers come out on top? And you'll all be happy to know, if you haven't read it, the givers, the kind people, the generous people, even when you're going to gain nothing, we come out on top. So yay us.
Yeah, you know what? And that's great. And I didn't know that. And I think that's great. I also think it matters a little bit less because ultimately, you have to live with yourself. Yeah. And there's just nothing that beats being a kind, gentle, loving person. And whether you don't need to be cutthroat to be successful in business. In fact, I would argue that particularly in this era, those that subscribe to old notions of how to do business are almost guaranteed to fail.
Does not well.
Yeah. Kristin, last question. As we think about listeners that are listening to this podcast or watching this YouTube video because they're struggling, they're facing some challenges in their business. Maybe they're kickstarting an entrepreneurial dream. Maybe their business is on the verge of a setback or has suffered a setback. What would be one thing that a listener who's struggling right this minute could do right after they finish listening to this podcast to move their life and their business in a forward direction?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I could talk about so many things, but I'll just first say that, I call myself an encourager a lot, or for you guys, I said chief encourager, but it's really because I want to encourage people in a lot of ways, but I'll just share one tip for now. And I think it's, yes, you need to work on your business and bet on yourself and, keep pushing forward, have that grit that's talked about. But what I would actually say is I encourage you to work on being a better human. And here's what I mean by that. We should always be growing and learning. It's much like nature, right? Trees, nature, they thrive, there's seasons. It's the same with humans. So if you're having a down moment, a down hard season, it's going to ebb and flow. You're going to come back. So what I would recommend is work on yourself, physically, go walk, do something that's going to, lower your stress, help you feel better, get some sleep. Mentally, learn something new, read a book that makes you interested or curious or kind of like stretches your mind. Work on your relationships, right? Go do something for yourself that's gonna, kind of self-care or just to let you reset. And the other thing I would say is people might be like, what? Struggle is actually a good thing. Hardship, challenging yourself is a good thing. So as an example, in the plant world, the more that plants are outside in the environment, right? So there's hot days that they're dried out, and then there's days where they're really wet. They actually create more, polyphenols, which are actually protect the plant, and actually they're better for us when we eat them. So much like humans, if we don't challenge ourselves, we don't grow, we're not learning, then we're producing less than we're able. But I think if we work on these things, sometimes when we're having a hard season or we're struggling to get our business off the ground, we can put it in better perspective, right? That in all of our life, and when we look back on our life, right, when it's the end, that business is great and important and it might pay the bills, but it's actually deep connections, and it's the impact and legacy that we leave in the world. And most of that comes back to what you said. Were we kind? Were we generous? Did we love people well? And did we share what we needed to share when we were here? And so that's what I would leave people with.
I love that. That's great. And, in essence, I think I would sum that up to do something positive for someone, including yourself. Actually, this, loving yourself is a really important aspect of being a complete human and a successful business person. So do something kind. That would be it sounds to me like that's what you're recommending. When this podcast ends, find one kind thing you could do today and then build on that. I think that's beautiful and wonderful. Kristin, where can people find you? If they're interested in, obviously they can listen to your great podcast, Building a Life You Love, Faith Fueled Woman, but where can they find you?
Yeah, I think the best place is to start at KristinFitch.com. And I'm going to, before this airs, once you tell me the date, I'm going to try to put up something for your guest, and it'll be at KristinFitch.com/brave. So we'll make sure we get that to you before this airs.
Beautiful. That's very kind of you. So our guest was Kristin Fitch. She's a podcaster, an online business and technology strategy consultant, entrepreneur. She has accomplished some really neat things. Being a top 5% podcast is a big accomplishment, and Building a Life You Love is a top 5% podcast. Faith Fueled Woman, it's a top 10% podcast. She's been very forthcoming about things that didn't go so well, as well as telling you about things that did and how she got there. Kristin, it's been a huge pleasure. I'm grateful to have you here. And I look forward to learning more about what you're doing. And hey, who knows, maybe Braving Business can be part of this network you're building.
Awesome. Thank you so much for both of you for having me. I loved our conversation today.
Yeah. Thank you for your time and your honesty as well. That was wonderful.